Hello, everyone, and welcome to, I believe it's the 7th edition of the Western Wing, where we discuss crime writing in BC and the Yukon with members of Crime Writers of Canada. Today with me, I have 3 BC authors, all of whom have a special love for thrillers. So we're going to be talking thrillers and very specifically standalone thrillers. So let me give a quick shout out to Amber Cowie, Meredith Hambrock, and Freedman. Hi, everyone. I got short bios for you, so I'll make it quick because let's sell you nicely. Amber Cowie is a novelist living in a small town in the west coast of British Columbia, Squamish, I believe, right?
Correct.
Her work has appeared in New York Times, Salon, The Globe and Mail, Crime Reads, and Scary Mommy. Her first novel, Rapid Falls, was a Whistler Book Awards nominee, hit #1 overall on Amazon, and was a top 10 best-selling Kindle book for 2018. She's a mother of 2 and a reader of many. She likes skiing, running, making up stories, and her internet search history is unnerving. Her newest book, Last One Alive, was released by Simon & Schuster in the summer of 2020. Meredith Hambrock is a TV and fiction writer living in Vancouver, British Columbia. Her most recent work was as the executive story editor of Corner Gas Animated, but I think that's a little old. We've done a few other things since then, but it's a reboot of Canada's most successful sitcoms. She writes short fiction and has been the finalist for the CBC Short Story Prize, the House of Anais and Broken Social Scene Short Story Competition, and has been published several prominent literary journals and magazines. Her first novel, Other People's Secrets, was published in September 22 by Crooked Lane Books. And last but not least, S.M. Freedman, or Shoshona, studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York and spent her years as a private investigator on the not-so-mean streets of Vancouver. Although I can kind of disagree, they're getting meaner and meaner.
I think it's getting way meaner now. Yeah.
Referring to her first love, writing. Her first novel, Be Faithful, was published by Thomas and Mercer. It's an international Amazon bestseller, reached the quarterfinals in the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award, and was selected by Suspense Magazine as the best debut of 2015. Blood Atonement was published by Dundurn Press in October 2022. I was waiting for your copy, Amber.
I have an electronic one. That's the problem.
I was selected by Globe and Mail as one of the best 100 books of 2022 and recommended by the Vancouver Sun's Holiday Gift Guide as one of 5 BC books worth buying this season. So welcome, everyone.
Yay. Yay. Hi. What great bios.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, you wrote them. I just edited them.
Sounds so different when it's read to me.
Very esteemed panel.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, and I think you're the right people to talk about the standalone thriller. Well, first off, let's start with, it's probably kicking yourself in the butt in the sense of marketing purposes, because I write series, and I know one of the benefits of crime writing a series is people want to buy the next book because they want to see what your characters are up to. You don't have that advantage. Do you consider it maybe a disadvantage or an advantage writing standalones? And I didn't pick who goes first, so whoever has a good idea.
I don't mind kicking it off. I have a twin sister, and when I was growing up, I used to always get asked, what is it like to have a twin? But there was no way for me to really answer because I had never not had a twin. I really had no basis for comparison. So I have never written a series, nor has an idea for one ever bloomed for me. So I'm not sure if it's a disadvantage in terms of marketing or sales. I think that my experience and a lot of the advice that I've been given in publishing is that you certainly need to write many, many books to be able to establish yourself as an author. And it's very rare for someone to be able to really make a career off one book now. I think that used to be true more so than it is now. So I have always thought if I write numerous standalones, it has similar advantages in the marketplace to writing a series. And what I've always been scared about, I think, to write a series, and also in standing in admiration of people who do, is that my ideas come to me in such a singular way. Like the characters have a story to tell. And then when the story is done, I feel like that character seems to really disappear from my head. I'm often thinking of the next story. And so I'd be really scared to start a series because I would be worried that I would get bored and I would want to write something different. I have maybe a shorter attention span than people who are able to carry, 26 or 25 books like Sue Grafton.
Love Sue Grafton.
Me too.
I've written a little bit of a series. So my first two books, The Faithful and Impact Winter, are the first and second in what was meant to be a trilogy, and I'm still kind of working on number 3 because it's kind of post-apocalyptic fiction, and that was felt very different to me when I started the series years ago than it kind of does in today's world. So I've been struggling with the third one, and I can say that in some ways writing a series is certainly easier in some ways because you have these characters that you continue to build on, but at least in my very limited experience, it hasn't been super awesome in terms of marketing, and I've had more success with getting my standalones to sell than my series in some ways.
Yeah, I would think I have a bit of fear, I guess, as a new writer. This is my debut novel, and my fear is that if it's a bomb for my first one, then I've committed to this series, and all of a sudden it's oh no, people hate the character. I just have to kind of walk away from it, and that to me is a bit of fear and commitment phobia, I think. But also my approach has always been kind of what Amber was saying, through character. And I really love to write character, to see a character go through a change. And then I kind of feel like it's hard for me to sort of invent a new change for them to go through. I sort of tried to start outlining a sequel to my debut, and I have an idea for it, but I'm having a bit of commitment. I'm having commitment issues about it, so I'm focusing on other things. But I wouldn't rule out writing a sequel maybe later down the line, if I could.
I know one person who's hoping that you do.
Yes, I know a lot of people.
I need to know.
I know, an ambiguous ending is not always everyone's favorite. You get a lot of harassing text messages late at night. People what?
It is my favorite, and that's why I'm I really am just so in love with it, because it makes me still the story still lives in my head, and I love that you did that. I think it's very bold.
No, thank you. Yes, I'm still afraid of my mom's book club, but that's okay. I'll just just avoid.
We're supposed to build tension, not have tension.
Oh, okay.
I was wondering, maybe Meredith, since we're talking about your book now, I didn't let you drink.
No, that's okay.
Amber, you're probably going to say no, but the rest of you, have you ever been tempted to revisit your protagonist? I already know your question, Amber, but what about even a secondary character? So if you had a cop, or just somebody that people come to you and say oh, that person was so interesting, even though you weren't writing about them, have you ever thought maybe I can center a story around them? And for you, I mean, you've got some great characters, Meredith.
Oh, thank you.
DJ overalls and
yeah. Oh gosh, I think I have too much love for Baby, unfortunately, and all of her deep, dark flaws, that I don't know if I could center a whole new novel around it. I do really like the idea of, I'm really, really hoping that I'll get to adapt it for screen. Obviously, that's such a pipe dream for all writers. But if I did, I really want to do a whole plot line with Deputy Donna, who's the very short sheriff in town, and have I don't know if I could carry a whole book on her. Maybe I would like to do that. I don't know. Now that you put it in my head, Eric, I'm gonna think about it because I think she's my other favorite character just because she's the exact opposite of Baby. But yeah, I don't know if I could commit. Again, commitment issues for a book because they're so hard to write.
Shoshana, any temptation?
I have had some temptation, but I've had a few people now tell me that the detective from Blood Atonement is kind of a secondary but really important character. They'd love to see something more with him, maybe, you know, about his wife and what happened to her, because he lost his wife about 10 years before this book is set. And so I'd never actually given that any thought at all. I just kind of Blood Atonement's a one-off and away we go. But now I'm going, maybe I'll need to revisit Bo Brunelli and see what's there. Like
a novella or something. He has such a great backstory.
He does. And I don't know, he's, you know, I don't know. I think I need to think about that once I'm, you know, I have 3 books that I'm working on this year already. And but maybe next year.
You're following Amber's advice and writing lots of books.
Yeah, that's just write them. Just keep writing them. One thing that I've noticed that's I think really beautiful and clever that Taylor Jenkins Reid does, she's a real favorite of mine right now, is that she embeds a character from a standalone into her next standalone, which I think is really fun. It's like a little Easter egg that she kind of puts in there, and it's not always obvious. Sometimes it is, you know, he's one of the 7 husbands, for example, in 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but that was pointed out to me by a book club, and I had just finished reading 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and totally missed it. So maybe not that obvious for someone like me, but I thought, oh, that's really cool. Like that's a way to kind of world build in a way, like in a quite a sophisticated manner, I think. So something like that is pretty neat, but I can't imagine like revisiting like I just always, it's like when I'm finishing one book, it's like there's 2 records playing at the same time. Like there's the record that I'm currently working on that's almost done, it's almost at the end, and then the new one that someone's put on in the other room that I can hear. And so I find myself very attracted to that second record, and I don't really feel that sense of like, oh, I'd like to go back to the first one and listen to it again, or there's one song that I really like that I want to play again. Like I just get really drawn to the next piece. So I think that when you build a lot of characters and a lot of worlds, you have that opportunity. It always exists. Like those doorways are available to you, and maybe you walk through them at some point, but right now it's definitely not what I'm thinking.
Well, you mentioned world building. Do you think, like in a series, you kind of have to build a very big world and a robust world, even in a small community? If you're writing a small community in a cozy, you have to have a baker and a giant world, and you have to get all the details right and know the eye colors of everybody, and if they have pets and all those kind of questions. Do you think it's easier or harder to continually build new worlds for standalones, or perhaps just massively create an epic world for a series?
I think it's harder to build new worlds each time, at least in my experience. Having said that, when I go back to working on the 3rd in my trilogy, I have so much content that I have to remember what happened to that character and what did I say they did, or, you know, so I actually find I have huge series Bibles for it. And it's like, you've already put these things in print, so you can't change them now. You have to work within those boundaries that you set in 2 previous books. And that I find challenging for my brain as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just keeping track of backstory, I found really difficult personally. So the thought of having to, kind of manage like a whole cinematic universe, or to manage like a whole new kind of world and setting, is difficult. I really love like specific settings and details. And I really like to make a world feel specific to the book that it kind of lives in. And so I don't know if I think I would rather come up with a new one every time, because that's fun for me, as opposed to have to remember, which is just stressful.
Yeah. I find myself very, one of the first points of inspiration is often the place. And so, I just submitted my 5th novel to Simon & Schuster, and so each of my 5 books have been placed in totally different locations. And so I do, on some level, I think that it's possible that those towns, sort of talk to each other, and they all exist in the same province or country. That they all have these happenings that are occurring simultaneously or within the same roughly span of time. But of course, none of the characters would know that in a town 500 kilometers away, that there was this other story that was playing out. So I think it's possible that, and maybe even likely, that each of the 5 worlds that I built actually are the same world in some way, that I, just have never really united them. But could, if I wanted to. They're all similar settings. They have the same sort of Pacific Northwest kind of vibe.
Well, let's talk settings then, because you brought that up.
Just like throwing them out.
Yep. Exactly. Not always, but quite often thrillers are based in cities. Nowadays, they seem to be drifting to the suburbs a lot. But all 3 of your last books, even farther away from the cities, very remote settings. Where do you come up with them, and why do you think of even these like far away settings? Like Amber, I'll start with you. Yours is on like a remote island. Couldn't be any more remote than that, or it could be maybe, but does that add to it? Does it take away the tension and the grittiness of the city by putting you somewhere beautiful?
No, to me, I live in a very small town called Squamish, and it is like actually where in some way where Last One Alive is based. I used the real artifacts and landscape of Squamish as the jumping off point for the place where I get my characters to, which is an imagined location, but again, it is a real area that exists. I just sort of created an eco lodge on the banks of Howe Sound that doesn't actually exist, but the banks of Howe Sound exist. So I think that for me, I live as a human being, as like a non-author, just in my normal life. I live in the forest. If I can be outside in the forest, that's the place that I prefer to be. And I find there's like such an amazing amount of tension and crackling excitement that exists in those areas outside of the city. I'm not really an urban person. I have lived in cities many times in my life. I find like a lot of the desire for me to build the world often comes from like the ground that my characters are standing on. And so it makes a lot of sense for that to be embedded in the story, and for me to spend less time thinking about like the architecture of the houses or what kind of kitchens they have, and more about like the sounds of the river around them or the calls of the owls late at night. Like that just is where my mind is. And I think that there's such a richness there to be explored. And I like to create tension with characters too, and between people, but that atmospheric creepiness kind of is always going to be the undertone of the stories that I write.
I'm really relating to exactly what Amber's saying. I think my last 2 books have both been set in BC. The Day She Died was more in Vancouver, although I kind of fictionalized it, and it's around the area where I live, right on the river. But the environment that you get in BC between the rain and the fog and the forest and the trees, and there's so much atmospheric creepiness just intrinsic in our area that we live. And then of course with Blood Atonement, because I fictionalized a sect of the FLDS that I wanted them to be near where the actual sect in BC is. That kind of guided me as to where I needed to go. And so I stayed kind of in BC, but just on the Alberta border. And then I wanted to have the Rocky Mountains as their backdrop and stuff, just to add to that atmosphere. But for, the benefit of that book, they really needed to be very isolated to protect themselves. And yeah.
Meredith, you have, as you call it, a crumbling lakeside community, or lakeside resort, sorry. From the little I know you, you seem like a city girl. Why did you pick this this location?
Yes, I am. I'll do like an annual hike maybe. And I do love to swim. But I do want to say, just also before I jump into mine, that I did really love how both of you evoked setting in such different ways. And I think Amber's like just got that like chill, the like cold of the rain and stuff like that, like really came forward, and just the kind of like just the subtlety of Grace's farm and how it was described in Shoshona's book. Like I was thinking about both of those, and I was very jealous just in how economically you both evoke those settings. Because I feel like I'm always like spending 5 paragraphs describing like a single chicken wing or something in mine. And I feel like I have a lot to learn. But yeah. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So for mine, I didn't really, I get so in my head about this, and there's a lot of fear for me, if I'm going to do a setting, to really do it justice, I guess. And I think maybe that's because I spent a lot of time trying to be like a very serious short story literary writer, and just not really what I love. And yeah, so I chose this like vacation town, and it was sort of inspired by, there's a bar in Penticton called the Barking Parrot, and there is and also just cottage country in Ontario that I spent a lot of time in when I was a kid. And I sort of just like mashed it up in my head. And I'm obviously like from the city. I'm not a like small town person. And so I was kind of just I've always like gone into those spaces as like a city person. And I was a lot of fun for me, I guess, to imagine sort of the like ire and the, disgruntledness of people who have to deal with people like me. And I had a lot of fun, I guess, thinking about it from like a local's point of view. But also I think there are a lot of like economic struggles that come with living in a really small town, especially when that kind of economics have changed a lot, especially in the last like 15-20 years, and just sort of thinking through like who gets to live in these nice vacation places and who benefits from it, and how do we use the land and that kind of thing. So trying to just be thoughtful about that as well. But it's also just fun, I think, in a small town, because everybody sort of knows each other, and there's so many beefs and stuff like that. As writers, you can really sink your teeth into all of the drama of being stuck in the middle of nowhere.
High school bullying.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, not setting, but talking about location. I think as Canadians, we all get this question asked to us a lot. How important, or does it affect your writing, being in British Columbia, or in broader scope, being in Canada? Does being a Canadian author change the way you look at your craft? Amber, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I actually, it's something I've been I've given a lot of thought to this, because the first 3 books that I wrote, I was working with an American publisher. And so I really fudged the setting. Like I knew exactly what towns I was talking about, and I had like some pretty clear landmarks that anyone from those towns would recognize. But it's very unattractive for an American publisher to have a named Canadian place. And so when I began working with Simon & Schuster Canada, I felt it was quite liberating to be able to be like, yeah, this is a book about Squamish. It is a book set in Squamish. And I found it really both really, I guess I said liberating, but also really terrifying, because I write books that are scary. And I was really worried, there's a long time between when you finish the book and when it actually comes out. So you have a lot of time to freak out, right? And one of the things that literally woke me up in the middle of the night was, oh my gosh, everyone that I know is going to hate this book because I've made our town seem the creepiest place that you could ever visit. You know, I've invented a witch, and I've created like these murders that are happening, and like it's and I've named the town, and I can't get away from that. But in fact, like the reception here has been lovely. Like people are so grateful, and I find it really powerful to be like, this is the place, and this is the honest truth about where I'm setting it. I think that, you know, we have a lot of stories that are being told now with a lot more honesty and a lot more courage. And I think that it's a small, tiny bit of courage as a Canadian writer to be like, no, I'm Canadian and I write about Canada. But to me, it's something that is very important. And I don't want to go back to being like, oh, this is Whoville, blah, 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 like, or Northern Washington, right? Or like, we always kind of do like that thing where it's like somewhere near the border. But yeah, I really want to be quite honest about the places that inspire me and be able to name them in full and not shy away from that. So yeah, I think it does matter to me that I'm from here. It is what often creates that initial spark when I begin a story. And I like being able to really be clear about it when I write now.
That really inspires me too, what Amber just said. It makes me think of like my first two books are set in the US. And I think that, you know, as the very first book that I ever tackled, it was like, well, I can't write about Canada because, you know, who wants to read about that? And so what Amber says about, yeah, that it does feel, having now written two books that are set in Vancouver or in BC, it feels very much like I'm being more authentic to myself to be writing in areas that are my home, and lending my voice to our home. And I kind of like that. I didn't know how I was going to answer that question, but listening to Amber inspired me. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's always power in things that we can bring specificity to as well as writers, like definitely being able, and I see that in both of your work as well, like so much of the strength and the how you write and describe things comes from, I think, just having lived it. And you can really feel it on the page. And I definitely have a lot of those fears that Amber was talking about, and a lot of those, I've had those conversations with agents and stuff like that as well. I was talking to a bookseller about this though, and they said, he was like, well, Louise Penny is the most successful like mystery writer ever, right? Right now, at least. And she's, set in Quebec. So I think readers are maybe less afraid of it than the industry is.
Mm-hmm.
Which, is a good point.
I think that's a really good point. And I really am like holding myself back from fangirling here, because I really did feel like in both of your books, like this, not the pure strength, but like something that the through lines like kept bringing me back to the page that I couldn't put them down, was because I really did recognize and feel very immersed in where you were writing. Because, I grew up in a small town in the interior. I lived in Nelson, which is very close to the area that you're talking about in the West Kootenay. Like I know those places. I can smell them, and the way that you both wrote them, I just was like, yes, this is the place. This is where I know. And I love that familiarity that's made new. It's like, I know those places, but you made them something different. And that's a really powerful thing as writers. And I really loved that. I'm very drawn to that. I loved both of your books so much. And I think that was a big part of why. And there's many other reasons, which we can get into later.
Let's talk plot a little bit. By definition, I don't know if do you describe your books as thrillers or just standalones? But
thrillers.
Yeah,
so,
this last one for sure.
So it's sort of, I don't know, it's in the name, kind of a thriller. It's meant to have tension. It's meant to have a lot of tension. Do you feel pressured to keep that tension up? Like, how can I make it worse? How can I make it worse? Or do you hear like critics saying more tension? Because I hear it sometimes, and I'm writing a cozy. It's like,
I mean, it's the whole idea of like, what are the stakes, right? Yeah, like, so I think you have to keep making the stakes higher as you go. I think that's true for every story, honestly, not just the thriller genre. I think it just looks different in different spaces and different types of stories. I think often the third act of a thriller, the stakes are like physical, like you've beaten like your characters down a little bit. And so the question is, will they actually survive? So that's something very specific to the genre that we write in. But I think that, yeah, you have to keep asking questions that the reader needs to not understand or not quite be able to predict what the answers will be, I think, to bring them back to the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something also that you both did really well in your books, especially in the openings. Like I was so drawn into them. And in Shoshona's, especially with the just like rapidly kind of changing point of view, I think was really like confident, and it's just such a cool way to kind of keep that like tension alive. And something I hope to steal from you in my next work, because I think for me, like I didn't necessarily go into mine being like, I'm writing a thriller, because that would scare me. I think it was more so just like, I'm going to chase this character. And I know genre always scares me for some reason. I don't want to get in my head about it. I just want to write what I want to write and then kind of figure it out after. And I think I wish that I had more kind of those like earlier kind of tension and questions earlier on, but because mine's a bit more, I think, of a slow burn is what they call it. But I definitely think if you have that like tension right off the bat, it's a great way to like suck in the reader, and you guys both do it so well.
I mean, I don't think I would totally agree with you in terms of other people's secrets. I think your inciting incident is also very strong. And yes, you're not like, asking the question of like, who has killed X or why did this crime occur? But there is a very strong and compelling reason for us to be invested straight away. And I actually found that I too am like really like about genre, but I liked that you kind of, I maybe you didn't do it on purpose, but I liked that I thought it was a really sophisticated take on the genre, because you were asking us to like invest in the characters and not necessarily the physical well-being of them, but like the sort of economic realities that they're facing and what that looks like for each of them in turn.
Oh, thank you. Well, that is like the one trick that I tell my students now. I'm like, if you're freaked out, just go back to character, like think about your character, because that at least is a way forward, I think, always. So I appreciate that.
But I also echo you, what Shoshana, I'm going to set you up here, because I really think that Shoshana, I have used your story, Blood Atonement, 3 times when I've been talking to different writers as like a brilliant way to execute shifting point of views, because the way you did it sucked me in and made me believe that something different was occurring than what actually was. And so I think that you did that so well.
And I think that's something that we all we come at it maybe from different angles, but at the end of the day, I think we're all very invested in character building and the psychology behind the people that we're writing. And I also tend to be a little afraid of genre and categories, because I'll tend to look at, okay, I know I fall under the like really big umbrella of thriller, but then each of my books ends up like, when they start to categorize it, okay, well, this one is cult thriller, blah, 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 blah. I can't wrap my head around those things. And I feel like those things change all the time. And at the end of the day, it basically is where it ends up on a bookshelf, which is maybe not my business. But I love to follow character, and I love to get deep into the character psychology and figure out their flaws and then mess with them. That's what I really like to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually very much leading to the next question, and maybe you've already answered it, Shoshana. But a thriller, in almost its nature, and I think it's changed over the years, but its original nature was plot-based. Fast-moving plot-based story. I do feel it is switching over to character-based. Do you think of it that way? Like, is the character's development really important, or is the plot still what drives the story forward? And
I'll start off if you don't mind, because I'm already in that mode.
Yep.
For me, it's funny because I went to Thriller Fest a few years back, long in the before times. I took a one-day course with Steve Berry, who's an amazing thriller writer. And I learned a lot from him. And then but one of the things that I really kind of started to realize is he's talking about real, old school, fast-paced, action-based thrillers. And it was a learning experience for me because I tried to write like that after I'd had this thing. I kind of took my manuscript that I was working on at the time, which was the day she died, and started to rewrite it in that way. And it did not work for me. And then I had to kind of come back to what I know and then incorporate some of the brilliance that I learned from him, and go, no, I write about people and characterization and psychology. Not that I'm a psychologist, but I that's what's important to me is the real psychological thriller. So I think if I was ever going to say I have to fit in a category, it's going to be psychological thriller, because without important, deep, flawed characters, I'm not interested.
I mean, if I had to subgenre Blood Atonement, that's what I would call it for sure. And from the way that you have talked about your other books, it feels like that's a good fit for you. But I agree with you more about like where it sits in the bookstore is not really your business. I really like that line. But I think that, yeah, in terms of like plot versus character, like it's something that you have to really, balance. I found my first book was like the worst reviews I got were very much that it didn't have enough of that sort of old school mechanical plot driven tension, that I was drawing too much from this relationship between sisters. The main characters in the book are sisters, and it was too it wasn't a thriller because it had too much about their sort of emotional states and the relationship that they had within their family, and that was what was kind of driving like the story forward. And it was truly the first time that I had ever really looked at that book in that way, but really any book in that way, because I think that I on some level was very innately drawn to books that had character first, maybe, or at least very present. Like I do enjoy those stories. I don't just enjoy them as a reader, I enjoy them as a viewer, and I also enjoy them in my life. Like I really love getting immersed in someone else's head, and whether that's a friend or like a conversation that I'm eavesdropping on in a coffee shop, that's what really drives like a lot of storytelling for me. And so I don't really find it like an either or. And I think that there's a way to do both. That's maybe now as a writer, I'm trying more to be very structured about plot and be like, okay, act 1, act 2, act 3, these are the problems that are meant to be solved. This is how the plot is going to unfold, because I know that I will always want to like delve into the character and bring them to the page. But I challenge myself to put them in these situations that also have like these external forces that are working upon them. So I think that it's good to have both, I guess, is like my very mealy mouth answer. But I'm never going to put down a thriller because I'm like, oh, this doesn't have enough plot for me. Like I find I am very like entranced and excited by getting to know someone and trying to figure out how that's going to be the obstacle that they have to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the real mystery is the human condition.
Yes.
But it like in reality, I truly believe that if you love a character, you'll follow them anywhere, or if you're at least entertained by a character. So that is just how I approach it as well, because yeah, again, I'm just not drawn to like I so admire just with what you're saying, people who can like really trick you with plot and like really kind of pull out the trap door at the end of the narrative and kind of be like, no, this was the killer and you just didn't see it coming. Or they have all these kind of clue trails where you can put something together in like a very cool Sherlock way. But I just don't think I have the brain for it. For me, it's always about character as well. Yeah. So just kind of approaching it that way. And I love thinking that I don't need to care about where my book ends up on the shelf. Oh my gosh. I feel like my agent might start banging her head against the wall, but I love it.
Well, sticking with our characters, I said most, but probably many is a better word. Many thrillers have female protagonists. Your last 3 books all center around female protagonists. Why is it that it seemed to be at least a current trend that the thrillers seem to have female protagonists? Maybe I'm putting myself out here, but is it because I don't know, they're kind of more vulnerable, less likely to like punch their way out of a scenario, and they have to use their brains? Is that the draw to it, or am I completely off?
Not in my book.
No.
There's a lot of girl fights in my book. But oh gosh, I'm not the one to answer this, I don't think. But I mean, I think there's a big readership for it. Definitely. But I'm not sure. Does anyone else have a?
I don't know if I completely agree with like our sort of opening statement here. Like but I read a lot of older books. Like I find I'm very drawn to like old sort of the like initial thriller writers. Like, and I grew up on like a lot of those books, and that's really how I maybe found myself like immersed in that kind of storytelling. And so I actually think that there are many thrillers with male protagonists. I wouldn't say that the majority of them have female protagonists. But I'm just sort of scanning like through my catalog of like, definitely I have a stack of books on my nightstand right now that are all very contemporary, published in the last like year or two, thrillers. And I guess they are all featuring female heroes or anti-heroes. Why do I think that that's true? Well, I think that there's certainly like more female writers, like, and I think that often like women are going to write, not always, but women are going to write women. I think that too, like, unfortunately, you look at somebody like H. Hickman, who like, there's people who are like writing women characters because they know that it's very marketable. Though I'm not knocking male authors who write female characters, because Riley Sager is one of my favorite writers, and most of his protagonists are women. And I think that he writes women really, really well. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's very trendy, you know, I guess, in like this sort of girl on a train, gone girl things like that had happened. That was a movement that occurred, you know, whatever, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And then this became a very marketable thing. But I think it's always been true when you look at crime, like P.D. James or like Sue Grafton, like they would write a lot of female-led stories. So I don't know. I think that there's a place for both. I enjoy both as a reader. I certainly I'm on a lot of panels with people who write both. And so I think that there's a place for both. Like, I think there's vulnerability that you can find in both a male and a female. I don't think that one is like inherently more vulnerable than the other, because the kinds of complications that they find themselves in are often so different.
Just as a quick side note, Gone Girl was 10 years ago.
Oh,
Wow.
Time flies. Sorry, Shoshana.
No, that's okay. I don't know, as a reader and as a writer, I like being in the heads of male characters and female characters. I feel very comfortable writing male characters as well as female characters. And at the end of the day, I'm not sure I give much thought to gender when I'm writing. They're a person, and they have all of their, you know, quirks and all of their damage and all of their personality and stuff, and their gender's just very little part of that for me. But that might also be because I tend to write in a way that's like, I'm not writing romance, you know, where you have to get into more romantic entanglements and relationships and stuff. I'm not necessarily writing that. I'm writing about their psychology and their, you know, and it's a thriller. So I think, I don't know, gender doesn't really matter to me. You know, the book I'm writing right now, or rewriting for the 10 millionth time, is I have 2 main characters, because as we are starting to learn, I like to bounce. I don't like to stay with one person. I like to kind of bounce around, and they are getting equal time, and one is a male, one is a female, and they have equal time on the page. and I'm equally comfortable in both their heads.
And you can see that in Blood Atonement, like you have both, and the voices are very strong, like in both ways. But I think I totally agree with you. It mainly to do with the characters and the characters you've drawn, like as opposed to the gender. Funny little side note though, when I wrote Rapid Falls, which was my first book, it's like I said, it's about two sisters. That's ended up being the final published version. But because I have a sister and I was feeling kind of protective about her, I actually changed the characters to be brothers in the first draft. And I got my husband to read it. And he was like, there's a lot of things that these brothers are doing with each other that I just would never do with my brother. Like at one scene in particular, I had one of the brothers was in a bed. He just been injured. He was in a hospital bed. And the other brother came and sat on the bed with him. And as they were talking, like reached out and placed his hand on the brother's leg. And he was like, I just would never do that with my brother. And I was like, okay, all right, fair enough. Like, maybe they're sisters.
Okay.
Yeah.
But having to change all those pronouns and switch them to sit, holy cow, that was tough.
Yeah, I know. As brothers, we sneak beers into each other's hospital beds.
Yeah.
We don't touch hands.
I'm gonna write that down.
Taking notes.
Yeah. Tell us more about what men do, Eric.
I've been in critique groups where I've been the only guy, and like often it's like, well, I have a Star Wars question. Everybody turns to me. One through line, at least in your most recent books, is there's a lot of childhood drama in your protagonists. So do damaged people make good protagonists in thrillers? And Shoshone, I know you're big on this, so why don't you start?
I am huge on this. And you'd think, based on how interested I am in it, that I'd had a really traumatic childhood and nothing could be further from the truth. So I have to say that first. Mom, we're all good. But I am super interested in the damage that is done to people in childhood and how they overcome that, or how they don't overcome that in adulthood, and how that leads to the choices they make in adulthood as they're going through. And so that is something I think I'm just incredibly fascinated by, and I like to tease out and explore in all of my stories. Yeah.
And Meredith, in your case, I think the trauma starts as a baby. she calls it, I think you say her full name is Dumpster Baby.
Dumpster Baby.
Yes.
But she calls herself Baby for short.
Yes.
So the trauma starts early.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, I certainly was not born in a dumpster. Same thing, Mom. We're all good. Oh gosh. The thing about this character, and oh gosh, how do I even describe it? I really like the idea of a woman who knew nothing about her past and didn't really know. And so she really is just a product of her environment, which is this small, kind of flawed small town. And it kind of made her feel a little bit empty inside. And she's got, a lot of sadness, and she copes with it by drinking a lot and partying and just really kind of focusing, like living in the now, to the extent that it's really causing her a lot of problems in her life. I like the idea of her sort of joking, trying to make a joke out of her past that is not really funny, and just trying really hard to sort of own it and to wear that kind of like shame every day in a way to find some joy in it, even when she cannot. So I think there is just, for me, I love this really strange idea of this sort of strange woman with a strange backstory, and love to just kind of sink my teeth into the character. And once I just started writing the character, I couldn't stop. So again, just back to character driven stuff, but less about childhood trauma than just this very specific strange woman.
But I don't know, like, if this was intentional, but what I really loved about when I first sort of learned her name and where it came from was that I felt like you really were like inverting this trope of like Dirty Dancing, because that's like her name, right? That's the character's name, and she's a super privileged, like she's coming in, she's exactly that city girl that you're talking about that's coming into this like environment, and we hear the story or see the story through her eyes. But Beatty was the one who was telling us the story, but being in a totally different place in the resort and the community. And did you do that on purpose?
I did a little bit, yeah. I've never seen all of Dirty Dancing because I just fast forward to all the dance parts because I really did not like that character, just being so not aware of the world around her. I found her so annoying when I was a kid trying to watch that film. But it's so hot also. How can you not, with all the dirty dancing going on? So
you were just there for Patrick Swayze.
Yeah. And I love a number. So it was kind of like a wink to me, for myself also. I think a lot of people have asked me about that, and it certainly is part of it.
Okay. I'm glad I was picking up what you were putting down, because I thought it was quite clever, and I was like, wow, if this is unintentional, that's even but what also really incredible that you kind of capture that zeitgeist and kind of understand how people, or not just know that there's something there. But I like that it was something that you had toyed with and did on purpose. It's cool. It worked really well, I thought. And
so how about Penelope?
Well, I mean, I would sort of bat that back to you and be like, is there a single character in the entire world, including real humans, who isn't flawed and has some kind of something that they're working out? It's not necessarily childhood trauma, but I think that we all have these bits of us that remain unresolved, right? And we have to maybe play it out many, many times in our life to be able even to see it, let alone solve it. So I think that for me, I could never create a character that didn't have something in their past, because I just feel like that'd be so dishonest to humanity. I think that we as people are just carrying those things with us, and it's part of the decision making that we do in every single day. And of course, when you're in a moment of high stress, it's going to come floating to the surface, and perhaps it's coming to haunt you. So yeah, I think that I often start there when I'm thinking about my characters, not even on purpose. It's something that I need to know to be able to understand how they would operate in the situations that I'm going to put them in. And in Last One Alive, it's the past that sort of is going to come back to haunt my main character. Penelope is my inciting incident. And so that was done very intentionally because it needed to be for the story to work. But I have never, ever written a character, nor do I plan to, who doesn't have something like that needs to be uncovered and then probably on some level resolved.
Another, I don't know if I want to call it through line, but another common factor you have between the three of you is your last three books, incredibly original, well thought up, just wow, where did you even think of that? Does having, and that's sort of thrillers have been around for a long time, and you can't just, make an average thriller, there has to be some uniqueness to it. Does that put an extra pressure on you as a writer to be I need to come up with a really good idea that's unique and different?
I feel like a lot of the questions you asked us today and the things that you've really drawn out in each of our works maybe set us apart from a lot of people who are writing because we are Canadian, because we are embracing that, because we are really considering the character first and always having to work through these pieces with them as we go, creates a uniqueness in our work. But I agree completely that both books that we're talking about from Shoshana and Meredith, maybe less on my own, have put something new into the genre that didn't exist before. And it's and I love that. I mean, I think that that's the mark of a really good book, especially I read thriller, I'm a voracious consumer of thrillers. So I do sort of have a sense of what's been done before and what's being done again, but in a totally new way. And that's like really something that I'm always going to be there for, especially when it's so well done, as with both of yours, where I'm like, oh, I know this is going to happen. And then you flip me on my head and I'm like, oh, wow, because you're so talented and understand the genres, like you were able to really suck me into this like false sense of like knowing what was going on and then be like, no, it's not that, haha, which I think is like, very satisfying for me as a reader. But no, I think that I think you tell the stories that are in your head, right? Like you maybe sometimes they are a little bit played out and you have to be like, how am I going to do this differently? But I've never consciously thought that. I've never been like, oh, I want to do this different. I know that this has been done before, so I want to do it differently. Like I took like for this last one, I was really playing with tropes. Like I've never done that before, where I'm like, okay, I want to take the locked room mystery. I want to be like very, very devoted to Agatha Christie, to And Then There Were None, but I want to add something that that's never been in that before, which was the supernatural. So when I pitched it, I was really like on the nose, and I was like, this is And Then There Were None meets the Blair Witch Project. And that was really unpopular. This is the challenge, I guess. I don't want to take up too much space, but the challenge is that you, as writers, as authors, like we are working, it's a business, and there's a lot of people who are working on the back end of the business. And so when I pitched that, my agent was like, no. Absolutely no. Because it's a genre thing too. It's a genre problem. But like as soon as you are like, I want to put a supernatural, I want to invent the myth of a witch. I want that to be like the through line of the story. People are like, no, because that's horror. You can't do that. That's not a thriller. And so I think when you're really playing with stuff and trying to like write the story in your head, sometimes you do end up with these roadblocks, and you have to be like, this is silly. Like, this is still a thriller. It's just that there's these like markers that people kind of put on you.
Yeah, no, the genre community, I feel like, again, I think the readers are braver than the like publishers. I hope nobody important is watching this, but because I do think readers really respond to that. Because in Amber, in your book, the witch part of it, that was the part that made me like really intrigued, just to constantly kind of think about what's real and what's not. And it reminded me of that TV show Yellow Jackets that's on the air now. People, like, it has that similar vibe of like what is real and what isn't, and especially with supernatural stuff. And it's such a historically, like, witches are such a female space, and I loved that element of it. And so I think too, for me, it's less about something that's in my head now that I've published that it wasn't before was, I have to talk about my book a lot, and I want an easier way to talk about it. So coming up with that hook that's easier to, and I think like the comps that you mentioned, Amber, and then there were None meets Blair Witch, like it gives you a pretty clear picture of what the book is. So that is in my head more. But I also, for me, I think when you read a lot and you write a lot and you engage with narrative and you're working really hard, you develop taste and you develop your voice, and your voice is really what sets you apart. And so to bring what makes your book a little bit weird or a little bit different, I think is so important, maybe more so than kind of thinking through it like a marketing sort of thing. Because I think I'm always going to have something like a little bit weird in my books, but finding ways to sort of like sneak it in while I'm still kind of building my career is, I think, the next challenge with hopefully next books.
I love the supernatural aspect as well. And it's not actually really in Blood Atonement, but I do write a lot of times with a little bit of supernatural bent to it. Certainly my first two are like that. And The Day She Died kind of is a little bit too, in a different way. So for me, that's always been, I've had that struggle too, where I had my former agent who was like, oh, this is more horror than thriller. And I was like, but it's still, for me, it follows the formula of thriller. It's just got a supernatural element. I guess sometimes I don't like being boxed into a genre. Like I love, and some of the books I love the most that I've read are cross genre. Like, where would you put that on a bookshelf? I have no idea. I'm glad that's not my problem to worry about, but I love it because it crosses, like, and I think sometimes, we're so worried, or maybe booksellers are so worried, or publishers so worried about finding the way to market it. And I get it, that's their job, that they try and box stories in, and maybe stories aren't meant to be boxed as well as they are. Humans aren't boxed well either, so why should stories be? And so I loved that supernatural element, and that just like Meredith said, Amber, that was one of the things that really drew me to your book, was that aspect of that haunting, that witch, that is there something supernatural going on, is there not, who's to say? I loved that. And that's something, I think I was a kid who read a lot of Stephen King, and so that was something that I loved, that aspect of the story.
Yeah, I think that it's really strange too how almost there's some writers who we give a lot of allowance to. Like when I look at like Ian Reid's books, like there's so much like fantasy and science fiction and supernatural and horror that it's like he floats outside of so many genres, and he's doing really well. So I think, Meredith, I'm going to steal your quote. Like I do think that there's so much more tolerance like with readers than sometimes we're allowed to sort of see or create in when we're working within like the business confines of what we do.
Yeah. I'll admit to you that last question of coming up with a good idea is hard or not. I recycle my questions sometimes, and I asked Linwood Barkley that question before, and he's like, "Not really. I just have to come up with one good idea a year, once a year, one good idea."
That's a very comforting way of looking at it.
I ran out of questions. Do you guys have any questions you want to ask each other? Perfectly fine.
I have a little anecdote about Linwood Barkley, if you want. I love him. I think he's so talented, and I think he's very flip, and he has like an interesting way of describing his career, and that seems very like on point with my experience. So I had him on a panel at the Whistler Writers Festival, but it was in the real thick of the pandemic. So it was a full like digital panel. And I was really struggling how to create, like I had many heavy hitters of like the Canadian crime lit, like because it was digital, I was able to get people that generally wouldn't be traveling to Whistler. And so I asked each of them to do a reading. And then it was followed by like an open session, sort of specific questions, and then like an open forum where they could talk. And he was like, "No, I don't want to do a reading. I hate doing readings. I don't see the point of them. They don't sell books." And I was like, "Well, everyone else is doing it. So do you mind?" And I'm asking for 1-2 minutes. I agree with you that a lot of readings are long-winded, and I don't always think they're effective. And on a digital panel, they don't always work. But if they're really short, I think they can really draw people in and set the stage. They're like, these are readers. They want to be part of your book. And so he got his book and he was like, opened it up and he said, "The protagonist died." And I was like, "Oh, okay, here we go." It is a line from the book, and that does happen, but it's really hard to start the conversation here. So he's like, it's really like, again, like, I think this is a really interesting maybe comment on like how there's different people in publishing and different like levels of confidence that occur, right? And so when we maybe let ourselves be like blown by the wind of like, oh, what are the genre expectations, or what will readers want to get out of my book, or how am I going to sell this one? I think you are like giving away that boldness that many authors and admittedly very successful ones who have earned like their ability to sort of like call the shots. But I'm trying more and more to be like, no, I am doing this. This is what I want to do because it's the story that's in my head. And I'm not going to let people tell me that it's the wrong thing to do because they're not writing it. And I'm going to write it and I'm going to see if it works. And then we'll go from there, you know? And I think that that's the value of having books truly that haven't always done well, to be like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, like maybe this book doesn't earn out its advance, so big deal. Like I've got to keep going, because I think as an author, you have to believe in yourself first. And then maybe you like pull others along with you.
Yeah. And know that you're the only person that can write your books, right? Like I am going to be the best. I am the only person who can write a good SM Freedman book.
Yes.
Nobody else can. And nobody else.
The world needs more of them.
Nobody else can take. There's lots of people out there that can write a better book than mine, without a doubt. But nobody else can write as good an SM Freedman book as me. And nobody else can write a book in my voice. That's the thing that I have that's individual. And that's the thing Amber has that's individual, and Meredith has that's individual, and nobody else can copy it. So I think for me, just kind of starting to mature into, I've got 6 books written, 4 published, but 6 written or in process of rewriting, is I keep leaning more and more into finding my own voice, being truthful to myself, and not letting that confidence be shattered by industry and market and stuff like that, because at the end of the day, they don't often know what's going to be a big hit either. They're just taking guesses and taking shots in the dark. So why would I listen too much to that as opposed to my own voice?
Totally.
Let me give you one scary thought before I'll let you Meredith speak. But just to get you guys scared, AI is coming, so it won't be too long before we say AI and be like, write me an SM Freedman book, please. And then you might read it and go, damn, that is good.
I've been playing around with it. I don't know. I don't think AI is very good right now. I'm just going to throw it out there. I know.
Not now.
And, it's also happening big time in the audiobook industry as well, with those, automated readers and stuff. And I know I have a very dear friend who's an audiobook narrator. And she's actually the narrator of Blood Atonement. And she's very concerned about it. She makes her living as a narrator, and they have this new AI thing that's starting to take jobs. And the worry is, where will you be in 5 years?
I was just adding tension.
Definitely adding tension.
Yes, definitely.
Throw something at your character.
Meredith pissed off the AI and they never saw her again.
Sorry, Meredith, I cut you off. You had a thought about it?
Oh yes, just sort of on, like, we were sort of going on a high note until Eric scared us. Just the just like writing a book is so hard also, that if you're not going to write the book that you want to write, then it's just gonna like feel bad. You're not gonna make, like, you're never gonna get a good hourly wage. Like, it's never gonna you have to love it, I think, or else it's just like the readers can tell, I think, when you're slogging through something.
And you're gonna spend a long time with it.
Yeah.
Because you go through 10 million edits and rewrites and stuff before you let it go into the world, and then you have to talk about it for a long time.
Yeah.
You better love it.
Definitely.
And I think when you're editing, or like in the sort of like secondary stages, like you really can feel like if something's working, because it's still enjoyable, even though you've read it 4, 5, 6, 700 times. Like, you're still invested in it. If those scenes are working because you're still there. And you can't do that when you don't like it to start with, right? Like you just get it's so tedious. And I agree. I think there are moments in a lot of books that I've been like, ooh, like, I just don't feel like the author was here. Like, I don't think they liked this part, because it's not really working.
Yeah,
and
that AI.
What?
Oh, no, sorry, I was heckling the AI.
Yeah,
hear that? We can tell.
That robot.
Sorry. This has been in my head for a while, because I teach also, and everybody in teaching is losing their minds about it, writing essays and stuff like that. And anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
It's okay. I ghostwrite. I do like freelance stuff. And a lot of people like I write like a lot of content for LinkedIn. And so it's all like the topic right now. Like everyone's like, it's so strange because some people they're asking me, can you write this pro AI, right? Like, I don't want to develop this content. It's boring. It takes up too much of my time. And then other like creative people who are like, absolutely like, this is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, before we go though, does anybody have any events coming up? If anybody's watching this real time,
Chapters Indigo on Granville Street tomorrow, Saturday, January 28th, from 1 till 3. I'm signing Blood Atonement and The Day She Died. So that is tomorrow, and then I've got a few things coming up. I'm going to be at the Jewish Book Fest in February, and I don't know. I know there's something else that I've just signed up for, and I'm blanking on it.
I know
it's with me. We're doing a signing on. Hold on, I'm going to get my calendar up. February 11th, Saturday, February 11th, between 12:30 and 2:30 at Book Warehouse on Broadway.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, with Winona Kent from Crime Writers of Canada. Yeah, and I'm reading at Noir at the Bar, Seattle on February 2nd at 8 p.m. It's called Alibi Room, I think.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
I forgot about one thing. I probably forgot about more than one thing, but I'm also at Fan Expo. I'm on a panel at Fan Expo that's going to be moderated by somebody at City News.
Oh,
cool.
Yeah. Is that soon?
That is coming up on February 19th.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Well, mine's a bit real pivot, but that sister that I was talking about that I based my first novel on is a yoga teacher. And so she has invited me to a yoga retreat on Salt Spring Island from July 6th to 11th, where I'll be teaching some courses on creativity, not just writing, but just how to find your passion in whatever it is that you want to make. Where are the spaces for that in your life? And there always are those spaces. I have 2 young kids and I've written 5 books, so you can do it, right? Like you can find the way.
Awesome.
Looks like you're hiding in your basement.
My office is a converted garage. It's actually freezing in here. That's why I was like clutching my teeth.
That's your space.
And my space heater seems to have worked. Yeah, but it's we find the spaces we can and we find the times that work. But sometimes I feel like when people are like, oh, it's, I sit down on my computer and I just can't write. I don't find that. I have no writer's block because the stories live in my head for so long before I can actually sit at my computer that when I get there, I just like pound them out usually. And so if you're in a writer's block, have kids and then you'll you'll solve it.
Although your upcoming yoga retreat almost sounds like the beginning of your book, though. Last One Alive. So inspiration, maybe. Yoga retreat.
Signing up for this.
Is there weather?
Remote location with a small group of people. What could go wrong? Yeah.
All right. On that note, thank you each of you for joining us today. Thank you anyone watching this. It's been a lot of fun talking about dark subjects with you girls. We went to a few dark places and it was fun. I'd like to say goodbye and goodbye to anyone watching.
Thank you. That was such a pleasure. Such an honor to be on a panel with you both. And I can't wait for your next books.
Ditto.
Bye.
Bye.